The Eastern Roman Empire lasted for 1,000 years. It was during this millennium that Constantinople became the center of culture and trade. But how did it survive when Rome fell? And what were the factors that led to its eventual demise? This is the entire history of the Byzantine Empire in 100 seconds. Let's go. In the year 284, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into two halves in order to more effectively rule over his vast domain. The eastern half would be centered around the city of Constantinople, formerly known as Byzantium, which was strategically located on the Bosporus Strait between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the western half was centered around Rome. Now, for several decades, both halves of the empire functioned relatively well. But in 378, the Goths sacked Rome, and even though the emperor valiantly attempted to rebuild the city, the damage was done. To many in the West, Rome wasn't just a city, it was a symbol. But if the capital could be sacked, then so could they. Within 50 years, the western half of the empire would collapse and Germanic tribes would establish their own kingdoms across much of Europe. Meanwhile, the East, with its wealthier population and strong army, survived. In fact, the emperor at the time, Theodosius the Great, would make Christianity the official religion of the empire. With the empire now united under one faith, the eastern and western halves would come to be known as the Byzantine Empire and the Western Roman Empire, respectively. The Byzantines continued to prosper due to their advantageous location along major trade routes. They collected taxes on merchants passing through their territory and controlled access to the lucrative markets of the East. However, as the centuries passed, the importance of trade goods from the East declined, leading to a drastic decrease in the empire's income. But perhaps even more damaging was the rise of Islam. While the Byzantines were preoccupied with internal squabbles, Arab armies swept across North Africa and the Middle East, conquering territory as far west as Spain and as far east as the Indus River. By the end of the 7th century, the Byzantines had lost control of the eastern Mediterranean. And over the next few decades, the Islamic world would become the dominant power in the region. For the Byzantines, this was terrible news because most of their grain and other vital supplies came from regions now ruled by the Arabs. As the two empires clashed over control of the Mediterranean, both sides suffered. The Byzantine population decreased by as much as 50% due to famine and war, and their economy was in sharp decline. But things would get worse in the 860s when the iconoclastic controversy rocked the empire. Now, up until this point, religious icons such as the Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ were highly revered throughout the Byzantine world. However, the emperor at the time, Leo III, believed that these icons were nothing more than idols and that Christians should not be venerating them. His campaign to destroy these icons was called iconoclasm, which literally means image breaking. Of course, many Christians strongly disagreed with the emperor's views, and so this controversy split the empire in half, with the West supporting the use of icons and the East opposing them. With the empire weakened by internal strife, the Arabs were able to conquer even more territory in the Mediterranean. The Byzantines were saved, however, when Nicephorus I came to power in 802 and ended the iconoclastic controversy by restoring the icons. He also waged war against the Arabs and recaptured several important cities. Though peace would return to the empire, the Byzantines never really recovered from the economic damage inflicted upon them by the Arabs. Their efforts to rebuild would be stunted by a series of natural disasters, including earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Throughout the rest of the 9th century, the Byzantines struggled to maintain control over their shrinking territory. But as the first millennium approached, the empire saw a resurgence of power under the reign of Leo the Wise. He standardized the weight and value of coins, reformed the tax system, and promoted trade with the Arabs. For a brief period of time, the empire seemed to be on the path to recovery. But in 976, the emperor's son, the II, took the throne and established autocratic rule, revoked many of his father's reforms, and alienated the empire's merchants by raising taxes on trade goods. Now, although Basil II was a brilliant military commander who expanded the empire to its greatest extent, his successors squandered the gains he had made. By the 1060s, the Byzantines were once again plagued by economic woes. Then in 1071, the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, opening the gates for the First Crusade into the eastern Mediterranean. By the end of the 11th century, the Crusaders had seized several Byzantine cities and established their own states in the region. The Byzantines would attempt to win back these lost territories, but they were unsuccessful. In fact, they would lose even more territory to the rising power of Venice. Now, despite all this, the empire managed to survive another 2 centuries, largely due to the efforts of the female rulers Irene, Angelina and Zoe. However, in 1185, a dispute over succession led to civil war, which ultimately resulted in the rise of a new dynasty known as the Komnenos. Now, although they initially succeeded in restoring stability to the empire, their alliance with the Crusaders soon made them unpopular amongst the populace. And in 1204, Venetian and French troops sacked Constantinople. While the city was quickly retaken 4 years later, the empire would never fully recover. The remaining territories were divided among several small states, while the Republic of Venice occupied Constantinople. So why did the Byzantine Empire last so long? Well, there are several factors to consider. First, their advantageous geography allowed them to collect taxes on merchants traveling between the east and west. Second, their strong military enabled them to hold off invaders for centuries. And third, the lack of serious rivals in the east allowed the Byzantines to focus their energy on internal development rather than military conquest. And that's the entire history of the Byzantine Empire. Thanks for watching.